Welcome, my friends, to the Sage of Quay Radio Hour, your home for free and critical thinking, and I'm your host, Mike Williams. Tonight, my special guest is Mr. Max Bliss. Max is an independent researcher and activist and a very prominent voice in the climate change and geoengineering debate. He was the keynote speaker at the first UK Chemtrail Conference in 2012, and last year, Max attended the Berlin Climate Engineering Conference, where his efforts, along with other activists, resulted in the Berlin Declaration being scrapped. The Berlin Declaration, if it had been approved, would have resulted in a public license to begin experimental deployment of climate engineering technologies. For this year, Max has already attended the San Jose and Cambridge conferences and will be presenting at the upcoming Paris session in July. All of the conferences are in preparation for the December UN Climate Treaty, which, if agreed to, will result in a barrage of climate laws based on pseudoscience and fraudulent claims in order to further implement a one-world government system. Max's activism to stop geoengineering is non-stop, and he is well known amongst the elite's climate circles as someone they must contend with. To attend the July conference, Max has set up a GoFundMe site. The link is www.gofundme.com/TFRBKC, and the link is also in the show notes below. Please donate. Max's presence at the conference is vital, and he is an empowering voice in the fight against geoengineering. My conversation with Max was wide-ranging and incredibly insightful as he discusses the players and inner workings of those pushing the agenda. The conversation starts with Max thanking everyone for their support and the funding to help him attend the San Jose conference. And so without further ado, here's Max Bliss.
I'd like to thank the people that raised the money for me to go to San Jose, because without their support, I wouldn't have been able to go. So that was absolutely sensational. When I look at the problems to do with geoengineering, climate engineering, one of the things that I'm becoming aware of is the long-term plan by the oligarchy, the banksters, the corporations who control governments all around the world to privatize water, and then to link that with the hydrological cycles and the control of these, or the strong influence on these, using weather and climate modification techniques, and which is basically rendering all nations' resources under the control of these corporation groups, which are ultimately the system of control for the world's elites.
Yeah.
Which I think is, it's for me, there might be many people who are sitting on the fence about geoengineering or the idea of chemtrails and weather modification. And, they might speak out, but they think it's like a wild conspiracy theory, whatever. I would like to try and appeal to those professionals who may be sitting on the fence, may be aware of more information, but can't see the bigger picture perhaps. And sort of, for me, I see climate engineering as the way to legitimize the programs that have been developed for decades, which they had problems to legitimize because there were many there are side effects. There, storms, droughts, changes in the climate, and lots of people in the past, in the 60s, for example, were aware of the weather modification experimentation, and they had problems with their crops, and farmers were suing, and they were winning. So I look at climate change now as this whole bogus threat to legitimize the weather and climate modification techniques. And these are now being employed by the global elites to continue with their globalization plans, with the world takeover. So I'd like to try and get that point across.
I think that's a great point. And, you mentioned water privatization. And, Max, I'm seeing more and more information coming out about that, where they're talking about the need to have to do that. As an example, the drought in California.
I remember watching years ago a movie with Jack Nicholson and Faye Dunaway and John Huston, I think, and it was called Chinatown. And it's quite a well-known film. But the premise of the story, the backdrop of this story, is about the drought in California. And this is set in the 1930s when you had the Hollywood Dust Bowl. And in that particular movie, the the oligarchy at that time, who's the money magnet man, John Huston's character, was deliberately siphoning off the water to create this drought so that particular corridors of land would become barren, and people were buying this land on behalf of this oligarch for a very, very cheap price. And the whole thing was a swindle. And I kind of look at that as an example of what may be happening today in California. They've been doing weather modification in California for over 50 years. And obviously, California provides an awful lot of food for the US. And there's a large population of people living there. There's people with money, Silicon Valley and the rest of it. And it's a very influential area. So that if these people who are running our world and are looking to take over all the resources, target an area such as California, that's a target-rich area.
Exactly.
Because that's an area with a lot of impact, a lot of media coverage, a lot of that would be an area where if you start to do your geoengineering, you start to create a drought and you start to put a value, increase the value of water, then I think you're going to have the oligarchy will have their impact, and that's a very important part of the leverage they want to have on the public.
Well, it's an area that also has the Hollywood propaganda machine.
Yeah, of course.
To help them get their message out.
Yeah. I mean, it's incredible the amount of fracking that's going on in California as well, which of course uses billions of liters of fresh drinking water.
Right.
And that water becomes contaminated with over 250 chemicals, those toxic chemicals, rendering the water unpalatable. So that water is essentially wasted for fresh drinking water, which is an incredible loss of water. And I'm quite certain that California is really that target area that they would like to highlight the problems, and then that will magnify, or that will rebound all around the world because of Hollywood and because of media.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, if you take a look at pictures of California and how the drought has devastated the water supply, the reservoirs, the creeks, the rivers, it's just amazing. And the thing is, you really have to search to make that comparison, because those pictures are not being shown for general public consumption. You really have to dig to be able to find that comparison between what it used to look like and what it looks like today, because the drought today is very much out of control.
Is it true that in California they have a long history of droughts? I mean, not just the 1930s Hollywood Dust Bowl. That historically, geologists have established that California is actually a drought-prone area, and it can have extended long droughts. And of course, is it a semi-arid area, like bordered with deserts?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll answer it this way, because I'm not an expert on California's climate, but in my 56 years of living on this planet, I have never read or heard of anything like the drought that California is being faced with today. There are areas, I'm going to suppose, within California that are prone to drought. Just like in North Carolina, where I live, we have our moments where we have drought, where we don't get a lot of rain. And that's the way it is in North Carolina, and I guess in large portions of the Southeast in general. But I think the difference is, when we look at California now, this has been going on for a very long time. And then when you take a look at what they're doing from a geoengineering perspective, the aerosol spraying, and there's a lot of very good research out there, as you know, which shows how they are altering the weather so that they don't get the rain. So I think, yeah, and I think you have to factor that piece in too. I think if you just say, well, California, has been prone to drought historically, yeah, I would say that's probably a true statement. But let's take a look at what's driving the drought today by taking a look at what they're doing from a geoengineering perspective. And I think that probably changes the discussion point.
One of the things I've learned about trying to understand the longevity about weather and climate modification, because it really is decades and decades
Yeah.
old. Um, One of the things that occurs is the fact that the weather and climate is a huge chaotic system, and obviously they've been learning to understand it. But one of the things they do is just try to nudge the whole system
Hmm.
as and where they feel is a strategic location. And I feel that because California has all these different potential strategic reasons for targeting. I know that being able to create a drought is something they've been able to do for quite a long time, for many decades. So to me, the idea of using geoengineering for weapons or for creating this drought, which I believe is man-made, or it's certainly influenced by man, and I don't mean by everyday man. I mean by the system, by the oligarchy.
Right.
I can see that maybe it's like a force multiplier situation, like like owning the weather 2025. They talk about using a small amount of energy to get a greater result, and I think that for many reasons, as we've already covered, California would be a key region to create this drought, to create this pressure, and just look at the timing of this type of pressure. They are moving towards a huge propaganda wave. We've already had lots of propaganda, but it's about to increase because of the United Nations Climate Treaty in December. So we will see the media, we will see different focuses to highlight the propaganda so that there will be as least opposition as possible. And I would imagine that the drought in California is a perfect example for them to say, look, we've got a climate change issue. We've got anthropogenic global warming. It's creating all these climate changes. We need to do something. And it's almost like the perfect recipe for them to have created that. But basically, people are going to get all this media message because of California and all the reasons we've already discussed. And it just seems the perfect geoengineering exercise to create the necessary hype, really.
Yeah.
And suffering. The oligarchy are quite happy for people to suffer
Oh,
to
yeah.
get where they want to get to. I kind of feel that the whole situation in California is a mixture of nudging nature and taking advantage of an area that's prone to something, so that they can do less work or less obvious work. Obviously, the spraying is phenomenal. I was amazed actually when I was in California how many days there was heavy spraying.
We have the same here, Max. The same thing here in North Carolina. I took a picture the other day. I put it up on Facebook. It was around dinner time. Rebecca and I were going out to dinner, and I said to her, take a look up at the sky. And she says, I know. It was just a total flippin' mess. And the problem is, not to digress here, but I think we're the only two people in the parking lot going into the restaurant that bothered to look up and take a look at it. That's the problem in a nutshell, is we've got to get more people to pay attention and to understand that this is going on, to stop staring at their feet or looking at their phone.
Yeah, the phone is a real one, isn't it? That
Yeah.
it's incredible to see young people at bus stops or whatever. They're all looking at their phones.
Right.
Even adults in restaurants and stuff like that. I think people should have a policy. If they're at a restaurant and they're eating outside a beer garden or whatever, they should all put their mobile phones on the center of the table, and the first one to reach their phone pays for the meal.
There you go.
Because we've got to break our habits. It's just incredible where people are slaves to this new technology that basically, did I get a text, or what's on the internet, or whatever, monitoring themselves. Sometimes I've found something that works. Actually, it's quite simple. Is just I often have a camera with me, be it an iPhone or an actual camcorder, and I could be in a shopping centre, out in a car park, or in town or whatever, and I'll just start filming something in the sky or taking pictures, and it's surprising how many people will check out what you're doing.
Yeah.
And it's just a simple way just to sort of draw their attention and just to get them to look up, because people are like, what are you doing? That seems strange. So that's a simple thing. It does help.
I think, most people just think that this is just too broad a conspiracy that you're saying that we've got people that are controlling the weather. I mean, and then they look at you and they say, well, how far out can you actually get with this stuff, with this conspiracy stuff? And like you said, what they don't realize is that this is something that they've been at for a very, very long time. This is not new stuff.
I mean, that for me adds weight to our research. As you may know, I research a lot.
Yeah.
Virtually every single day, I'm researching. And I tell you what, generally every day I will find something new. Sometimes it's only small, but other times it's so big it keeps me going for hours and hours and hours looking for more information. And I can assure you that we're doing weather modification during the Second World War. They were doing weather modification before the Second World War. And there are the world's leading physicists and scientists of their day at the end of the Victorian age and the end of the 19th century working on weather modification. And the really top men in their field were openly talking about it over 120 years ago. So this is of paramount importance for the powers that shouldn't be to have the ultimate control is to control the weather. With the weather, you control the hydrological cycles, water supply, and you control food supply. You control nations. Nations are at the behest of their natural resources. So if you start to control the weather and climate, it's like the super weapon.
Yeah. Far
worse than nuclear weapons, as has been stated by some leading figures in the past. That this really, being able to control the weather is the most effective weapon that there will ever be.
And Max, when you think about it, it's stealth. They can dance around it, not talk about it. People will debate it. Some people will be very apathetic and not care. It's very different than when you build a bomb and you drop a bomb. People see the bomb, they hear the explosion, they see the death that comes about because of the war machine. But when you start talking about the weather, hurricanes and tornadoes and floods and everything else, most people are just going to attribute that to Mother Nature. So it's very stealth.
It's the ultimate plausible deniability weapon.
Yeah.
Only based on the fact that most people really do not understand how complex and how well developed the military techniques are, or the covert techniques are for weather and climate modification. Simply because, this is what the fact that there is so much information there if you go looking and then realize that nobody knows about it, that's a very strong indication that they have been deliberately keeping it quiet, deliberately keeping it within certain circles, and the majority of people are completely unaware of it.
Right.
So therefore, that adds weight to me that this really is something of great importance for so few people to even have an idea that they might be able to do weather modification. It's crazy to a lot of people. That I just think that's beyond man's capabilities. But when you look into the longevity of the development and research, it becomes quite clear, really.
Well, and the thing is, if you do some research, you will find their white papers and their strategy papers, and they talk about it all the time. Before we got going with the show, just the other day, I started writing down all the terminology that I know that they have used to talk about the climate change, geoengineering. And, to me, whenever they rebrand or create a new phrase, it means that they're trying to stay one step ahead of all those people that may be catching on or starting to get an idea that maybe there's something to this geoengineering and this aerosol spraying program. So I wrote down global warming, global cooling, climate change, climate remediation, geoengineering, solar radiation management, and now there's a new one out there, albedo management, and albedo meaning reflectivity, right? So
and climate intervention is another one. I don't know.
Okay,
think you mentioned
all right. just rattle all those off. And I
Yeah.
did that, right, for the sake of the audience, to help them understand that there's a reason why they continue to change the terminology.
Yeah, it's called rebranding.
Exactly.
And they need to do that because either that particular strategy is not working, or yeah, as you say, too many people are catching on and beginning to question it, which must be a bit of a game of catch up, because as people do get a bit wiser to what's happening, then there is already a captive audience, and they'll be aware of the shift to the next rebranding.
Right.
So those people, by rebranding it, you don't lose those that are waking up. It's their desperate effort to slow a mass awakening.
Right.
But I kind of feel that they can't stop all the momentum just by simple rebranding.
Yeah.
It's just a setback. You know, it's almost like they're throwing logs in a fast flowing river trying to dam it. They're definitely responding. They take us very, very seriously, by the way. They're aware of what we're researching. They are frightened to actually look at any evidence. There were many times when I tried to get David Keith agreed to me that he would have a roundtable public discussion. But when I tried to pin him down in Cambridge, when he tried to get out of it, and then eventually he said, okay, you can come to my university in Harvard and you can do it there. You know, like the most difficult thing. He knows I haven't got much money. We were there together in Cambridge. He'd already said to me in San Francisco that he would agree to do it. And this guy is just evasive. He's like a slippery bar of soap, and he lies on right to your face. On a spot. And it's the same with Ken Caldera. He did a little trick with me when I was in Cambridge. He accused me of calling him a liar and saying he's not speaking to chemtrails, like trying to blow up a situation. So basically, he was fending me off for a period of time. And then he came back to me later that evening, after a few hours had passed, and apologized to me, saying, I've got you confused with somebody else. And that was enough to buy him enough time that basically we couldn't get to business.
Yeah.
There was a guy in San Francisco who I really quite like, and I've learned quite a lot from, called Jim Fleming, who's a historian on weather warfare. And so I've learned quite a lot from him. And he was on the panel, the geoengineering panel, and basically his role, in my opinion, was to poo-poo all the previous stuff as barking mad type scenario. Even though several presidents of the US have been openly talking about controlling the climate, like President JFK, like Eisenhower, like Lyndon Johnson, like Nixon, you know, they've all had their policies on controlling or working to control the weather and climate. So these are the people right at the very top of power, and yet this historian was trying to poo-poo it. So I said to him, you know, I've been doing some more research, and we'd already talked in the past. So he was like, yeah, it's good to see you again, because I saw him in Berlin. And I said to him, I think I've got some more information for you, you know, because I really admire your historical research. And then I said, what about contemporary stuff? I said, and I tried to show him a video of two planes flying, and one plane stops its trail, and then the same plane starts its trail, but it's flying in parallel right next to another plane. So it's no way it's atmospheric conditions. And obviously the plane's still flying alongside the other one. So it's not an engine failure. This guy, Jim Fleming, refused to look at it. Like, he kept on averting his head. And it's like, okay. I said, I'm really sorry, Jim, if you don't want to see something that might compromise your position, because I realize if this is evidence and it compromises your position, you can't see it, because if you see it, then you've got to react to it. So that was an interesting situation. I showed the same video to David Keith at San Francisco, and he said, that's just a contrail. And I said, yeah, but you can't have a plane. It's contrail just stopping, and he said, you can't trust anything you might see on YouTube because it could be photoshopped.
Oh,
and then ran away. Because, well, in fairness to him, he was about to start his presentation, so you know that was fair enough that he should run away at that time. But he was basically just poo-pooed it, and these people just don't want to see anything that might compromise their position.
Well, let me ask you, Max. I mean, then it would beg the question: are we wasting our time even addressing these guys or going to them or trying to speak to them? Because it seems clear to me that obviously they have an agenda, and if we go to them and start to try to show them evidence and research that's been done, and if they just walk away from it or they refuse to watch videos, where does that get us at the end of the day?
Well, I must admit that I kind of have I've come to that conclusion myself, actually.
Yeah.
That possibly it's kind of like a waste of time, but I would like to get together a bundle of evidence which is like really challenging. And the problem is trying to, like David Quay said, okay, you can come to my university, you can give your presentation, we can have a roundtable discussion. But I don't believe him because he's lied to my face.
Right.
And I'll tell you how he's lied to me. I went to his presentation at Oxford University, and he gave a presentation about geoengineering. I gave him quite a few questions at the end, which was pretty good. And they're all compromising, and put him on the edge of his chair, and he was in a bit of a difficult position. And then afterwards, when that was all over and we were talking, and I said, David, thank you so much for coming and everything else. And it was really good to be able to talk to you. And I said, earlier on, you said you wanted to use geoengineering. You said it has great leverage and you wanted to get the temperatures back to pre-industrial times. Now, I mean, I recorded him saying this because I recorded the whole presentation. And he said this many times, and I've read his book, A Case for Climate Engineering, and he categorically says to get it back to pre-industrial times. Now, when I said to him, pre-industrial times, isn't that the Little Ice Age, when the Thames used to freeze over and, temperatures were much, much colder? And he said, I didn't say pre-industrial times. When he realized that, yes, pre-industrial times, that all these climate engineers and the propaganda machine is trying to reinforce with the public by repeat, is the Little Ice Age, when, of course, temperatures were colder. We don't have the Thames freezing over now and have frost fairs on the Thames. But that is pre-industrial times. So they've got a real flaw even in their plan. But David Quay lied to me because he said that. He only said it literally 20 or 30 minutes before. And when I tackled him on it, saying that the Little Ice Age is pre-industrial times, which you can't deny because it was.
Right.
He said, I didn't say pre-industrial times. So that's how a guy can just lie to your face.
Yeah.
When he just said it in a presentation. So he's very, very dishonest. At the conference in Cambridge, he was almost like an agent provocateur at times. They change. One thing I've noticed with our questions and discussions is they change their tactics very quickly, or they change what they're talking about to fit the latest information that we're highlighting. Like, for example, I was referring to old papers, scientific papers from Edward Teller, where they were spraying metal particles into the atmosphere so that they could either warm or cool the planet, depending on the climate issue, which is an interesting paper because they does specifically say they can use that technology to do both. So you could say, well, couldn't you use it strategically to create the illusion of global warming? And there's a paper to confirm that it can be done. And another paper I was researching was about the photophoretic effect of the sunlight to make aluminium nanoparticles levitate. In this paper, David Quay says that sulfuric dioxide or sulfuric acid, which then becomes sulfuric dioxide, has its limitations for scattering. So they want to use the aluminium. Well, I was talking about those papers, and in his presentation, they're there all of a sudden. And they're old papers as well. So he's brought them back up, and it's almost as if they're monitoring us and aware of what we're doing, what they're talking. They're trying to stay one step ahead. And to me, it seems very obvious and kind of desperate.
That's very interesting, though, Max, because the fact that they are paying attention, as you said before, that this is making them, I guess, very uneasy, very nervous. So How much pressure do you believe is on them from researchers like yourself who are keeping an eye on the ball?
I think it's immense. Interestingly, when Ken Caldera did his little offended trick on me to make sure that he could fend me away and just keep a distance, I went outside with a friend of mine, Terry Lawton, and I said, I'm amazed. I can't believe that Ken has done all this in the heat of the moment. Because I was quite shocked, actually, because I was really trying to hope that I can reach these people in a diplomatic way, in a just an ordinary, I mean, these people know me now, and I'm not offensive to them, and I'm not. I want to expose the truth,
Right.
but I'm not going to do that by confronting them in a manner that makes it easy for them to say I'm not going to talk to you. I am polite with them. I'm direct, and I'm respectful of them, even though it's not always easy. But I want to make progress, and I don't believe we're going to do that by calling them names or being offensive. And I went outside and I was talking to Terry, and he said, "You know what? I've heard it's very difficult living with a lie, and I believe that the pressure is mounting on them. It's immense because they're Ken Caldera and David Keith are both funded by Bill Gates, and I often refer to Bill Gates as Bill, inverted commas, I want to kill your unborn, end commas, Gates. He's a monster who's tried to convince the world that he's a philanthropist, but really he's an absolute monster. And he is funding David Keith and Ken Caldera to the tune of millions. And I think that they are under enormous pressure because they are the ones who are the figurehead. They're the main salesmen, and everyone else are falling into line behind them, and they're steering the ship. I don't know if they do a good cop, bad cop act or whatever it is, but they have different personalities. And the truth is, the more and more people who do their research and realize that weather and climate modification techniques are many decades old, and then you start to draw in the geopolitical activity over the decades, and you realize that corporations and banks like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund put pressure on governments to privatize their natural resources, like water, for example, you can begin to see a very clear pattern of these extremely rich people, these oligarchies, the elites, the criminal elites who control the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank are quite often the ones promoting the global warming agenda. These people are all linked with people like Bill Gates and the elites of the world. And I think that Ken Caldera and David Keith are not very far. They're on the fringe. They're high up lackeys of this agenda. And as more and more people begin to realize, at some point, the whole climate industry scam will become outed. And then we're left in a situation: are David Keith and Ken Caldera criminals? Are they guilty of fraud? Are they knowingly misleading the world, or are they aware? Are they any good at what they do? If they're competent scientists, then I would say that they are aware of what's going on, and maybe the money is too good, or maybe they're on board as far as the ethos is concerned. Maybe they want to see world domination. Maybe they want the new world order. I can't say. I know that at some point, when enough people start to wake up to it, when enough of the professionals in even in the climate industry itself begin to know of, like, the ClimateGate scandals, where all these emails were hacked, and it's been proven that the climate scientists don't understand why there hasn't been no global warming for 18 years, which, interestingly, at the Cambridge conference, David Keith said, we have a pause and there has been no warming for quite some time. But they have to admit it, because it's getting to the point where enough people know that now. Yeah. But look at what he was saying a couple of years ago, and he was saying global warming is the most terrible thing that's happening in the world, and we need to find a way to create the leverage to control it and whatever. It's unfortunately they're maneuvering public opinion into the situation where we're supposed to believe the CO2 is a demon, it's creating this warming, and the only solution is to create a sun shield in the atmosphere to reduce the amount of heat coming to the surface. And we also have to get to a CO2 zero economy in order that the long-term effect means that we can eventually stop the solar radiation management solar shield, which it's just basically how can we manipulate and globalize and change society into this new world order that they want to achieve using a scientific dictatorship, using technology. There's an abundance of new technology that they are waiting to sweep into our lives with nanotechnology, bioscience, neuroscience, information communications technology. It's going to transform our world, but a lot of that change will only be accepted if we believe all their lies.
Max, going back to David Keith and Ken Caldera, my view is I don't see how they could not know, to be quite honest. And the whole fact that they're trying to outmaneuver researchers and activists like yourself says to me that they understand the other side of the debate and the argument. They know it, but they're complicit. And, you have to say to yourself, at least I think about this, people who do these types of things, and it's not just them. There are many people who are foot soldiers trying to implement this New World Order agenda. Where is your soul? I mean, where do they think at the end of the day they're going to be, and where do they think they're going to fit in when the dust settles?
I did realize a few years ago, personally, from my own perspective, many years ago in the early 90s, the propaganda about the eco situation has been developed since the 60s, more or less. And, that's been incremental in its development. And during the early 90s, I remember reading books about the harm that's been done to the planet in their build-up and their propaganda build-up. And of course, there is being harm done to our planet.
Right.
Well, I believe a lot of that is intentional. There were times in my own past where I thought humanity doesn't deserve this beautiful planet because I was being sucked into that propaganda in the early 90s. And I was becoming sort of pissed off with humanity, thinking, we don't deserve it. We're destroying it. And that was before I continued to, before I'd done enough research to realise that actually there's an agenda at play. Now, I do wonder if the people like David Keith and Ken Caldera have been swallowed up by the propaganda over their lifetime. And maybe they believe that the overpopulation thing, that's a myth. Maybe they believe that. Maybe they believe the harm that's happening to the planet and the change. David Keith does talk about himself going off to the Arctic and going off to remote wild locations, and how his father and other people in his life were rescuing wild birds of prey. And he has an affinity with nature without man in it.
Yeah.
So maybe for him, we could procrastinate and say his motive is that he believes all the propaganda, and he's been completely brainwashed. And maybe it's the same for King Caldera. Maybe, or I don't know, maybe these people are just elitists and believe that they're better than everyone else, and they want to cull the peasants.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I realize it's speculation on our part, but I don't know. I take a step back and I shake my head, and maybe you're right. Maybe it's just, they have been in the system for so long, so indoctrinated and so propagandized that they believe it all.
But saying that, though, they do know that they are lying. They do know that they're misrepresenting the facts. They do know that data has been homogenized, that data has been skewed to fit the model. People like Michael Mann have been exposed with their hockey stick. Yeah. How you could apply any data to that and get the same hockey stick, from his mathematical model. Basically, they are aware that they are conning the public. So as far as being indoctrinated to the point where they believe their nonsense, I would say that's only in reference to maybe their dislike of the human race as a whole.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, I personally think, people are wonderful and there's plenty on this planet and we can all share it. The problem is there's a small dominant minority, a greedy elitist group that want to control it all and they're not sharing.
Right. They're not sharing, they're not engaging the science and the technology to help humanity. It's all being used as an anti-humanity agenda. That's very plain and simple to me. And I'm sure maybe there's folks listening that wouldn't agree to that, but that's how I see it. I mean, I don't see them running around. I mean, take a look at all the areas in the world where people are starving, they're homeless, there's no medical treatment. And you're going to tell me with today's technology and today's science that we can't help these areas? I mean, that doesn't hold water, doesn't make any sense to me. Yet we have poverty-stricken areas, where people are suffering day in and day out.
It's by design.
Exactly.
Following the Second World War, there was a document. Well, there was a report commissioned by King George VI of the UK, of England, and it was about the state of the Commonwealth and threats to the Commonwealth because they knew that following the Second World War, the geopolitical situation would change. Now, one of the findings that was very, very critical was they were concerned about the Third World, which of course the British Empire controlled an awful lot of it,
Right.
and their concern was population. Not because of the lack of resources, but because those nations would become stronger. They would want their independence. They might develop a bigger military. They might maneuver themselves into a situation where they might get freedom.
God forbid.
So they started to engage in a long-term program of population control, and that now has been taken over by the Americans, who still work on behalf of the Crown. The US is actually a covert colony of the Crown,
Right.
From the UK, following, debt basically is the way they keep control through the Federal Reserve. But in 1974, you had Henry Kissinger with Memorandum 200, which was about using food as a weapon for population control in the Third World. So all this starving, all this horrific famines, all these problems that these people have to endure for decades is because these people at the very, very top are so frightened that they will lose their control of their privileged positions. Those people at the very, very top are the ones that want absolute control of everything, and they will allow millions or billions of people to suffer so that they can maintain their position.
You're absolutely right, Max.
And this is the unfortunate reality of it. But,
Yep.
It becomes clearer when you realise that maybe they've been using weather modification in Africa for 50 years. They were able to use it during the Second World War, and they were using it before. So I'm quite certain that these people that control nations, empires, world governments already exist, and those that aren't a part of it become rogue states and suffer a war or other methods to bring them under control. We are in an age now. All the governments are gone, but it's the people. The people haven't gone because people still aren't aware of what's going on.
Yes.
And that's their problem, because it only takes for everyone to begin to realise what's going on and to change their habits and stop watching TV and stop looking at their phones and start looking up and looking up in the sky and looking up at information on the internet,
Right.
or in books or in scientific papers or whatever it takes to get the hook in. We need people finding out this information, using verifiable information, and beginning to see the bigger picture and becoming motivated, changing the way they live. We're in a fight for our freedom. We live as free-range slaves now. When you cut to the chase and you find out how we are forced to live in a very, very tightly constrained life, we live as free-range slaves. Well, we shouldn't be living that way. That's been forced upon us through generations of manipulation. And we're at a breaking point now where either people realize how we've been treated for generations and decide they want it to change and then look for how it can change, or people continue And the change which the oligarchy want to bring in their new world order is forced upon us, and we're in a position where we can't change it. You know, we're at the precipice.
Yeah, we absolutely are, Max, and that was very well said. It really was. And you mentioned the governments, and there are no governments anymore, and that's what everybody has to start realizing. The government that you think is there is masquerading. It's a masquerade. It's part of the deception.
I
It's
call them
part of
puppeticians. They're puppeticians. They're not
exactly.
politicians. They're puppeticians.
Yeah.
They're under control. They're either career people or they're whatever motivation puts them in position. They're I mean, we in the UK, it doesn't matter which party gets in. It's a one party system.
Same here
You
in the
know.
U.S.
Yeah, I think it's the same everywhere. It's the illusion of democracy, or whatever system you're operating under. It's all an illusion. Ultimately, the oligarchy have control over us, control over education, control over our resources, control over our media, control over everything that comes into our lives, except for what we think. And they have a good effort at trying to control that too.
That's absolutely right. That's what the media is there for, to control your thinking and your thoughts.
Yeah, predictive programming, and to sow the seeds of where they want you to go next. And but interestingly, I think that when people begin to understand that, it becomes ineffective.
Oh, absolutely. I always tell people, Max, once you look behind the curtain, you see the great Oz. You never look in front of the curtain anymore. You're always looking behind the curtain. That's absolutely right.
That's interesting, isn't it? That I've had people before at the conferences say to me, "You can't stop a juggernaut," and I say, "Well, you know, I don't want to stop a juggernaut. I just want to be Toto and pull that curtain back and let everyone else decide what to do. You know, that once they can see what's going on, and I think more and more are.
Yeah.
And I'd love for some of those people at the conferences I go to realise that even if they were on board, maybe where it's going
Right.
is really unpalatable. You know, maybe it's time for them to think, hang on a moment, is implanting humanity a step too far with microchips? Is where we're going in the future just actually where you want to be? Maybe think about it. And humanity can be many different things, not necessarily just what the oligarchy want. And everyone could be free and enjoy the benefits of fantastic technology, cheap or nearly free energy and resources. We could completely change the way we live on our planet. We have the ability. It's just being withheld by the oligarchy who want to control us. So, those people who are part of the system, I'd like them to wonder, is transhumanism, is that a good idea? Where we actually have technology inside our bodies, so people are no longer free thinking or completely monitored wherever they go. It's literally, we probably are at the stage now where if you have a mobile phone, you can be monitored wherever you are.
That's right.
And you can be listened to through your phone, and you can be monitored. Imagine a store card. People have store cards when they go shopping, and that's used so that they can get marketing trends from your purchasing. Now, if they're using that same type of idea with your mobile phone, it will be, okay, we're going to market trend every use of your internet activity, your mobile phones, where you go to, how long you spend there, what you spend your money on, and basically every part of your life, no matter how intimate or at least what they can manage to ascertain from technology where they can track you completely. That's what we have now. When it gets to the stage where there's an implant in our bodies and we move to a cashless society where everything's electronic and you really are truly a total slave then, because even if you're a dissident or an activist or just a free critical thinker, if you decide you want to do something which goes against the state's policies, they can just stop your money. Because it's
Exactly.
electronic. And this I would say to those people in the establishment, oh, come on, is this not a step too far? Is this just really what you want the legacy of life on this planet to become?
Yeah, the only thing I could think of, Max, is the people that are even the foot soldiers in this whole program, they must believe or must have been told they have some guarantees that all this stuff that's going on, RFID chips and so on and so forth, tracking, surveillance, all the big brother stuff that's out there, it won't be applicable to them. You will have a good life. You will have a sovereign life. That's the only thing I can think of because, there's this, they dissociate from the rest of humanity. So I don't know. I have no other explanation for it.
It's a very difficult one to try and understand, isn't it? I mean, I basically have realised there's an awful lot of dumb, clever people out there. If that makes sense,
No,
I
that's
think I
absolutely right.
think they're pretty easily manipulated. They have they have too much to lose or whatever it is. But I mean, to me, maybe they can't see the bigger picture because they're just in too deep.
Yeah. Yeah. Very
Maybe they didn't want to
compartmentalized
admit
too.
that to themselves. I mean, it's an horrific future, which interestingly has been written about many times in the past. You've got like a combination of George Orwell's 1984
Hmm.
and Aldous Huxley's Brave New World.
Right.
And these are important books from the 1930s and from the 40s where these people are writing about a future where we are living under a scientific dictatorship, under a one world government system, and these are perhaps could have been viewed as extreme examples of the way life could be on our planet. But I believe with the technology that's emerging, the life that we'll be leading will be one step further than those projections from those two examples there. It will be even more extreme and even more tightly controlled, and it will get to the stage where they already are researching on how to secure an interface with our very thoughts. With the Human Brain Project,
Yep.
they are working on an interface with technology and our brains.
That's right. There was a recent
Um,
article on that I actually posted to the blog. So all this stuff, it's really interesting, Max. Back when 1984 and Brave New World were written, if you read those books back then, you were probably thinking, oh, this is just so far out. Now, I've read both books. And so when you read them today, it's amazing how much that's contained in there. You will take a step back and think to yourself, well, this is happening today. This is in play today.
yep.
That's the thing, back in the 30s and 40s, you would read those books and you think, oh, that's just crazy, wild stuff. You read it today, and I'm going to ask the audience, instead of just reading about those books as references on websites and on videos, go buy them and read them. And then take a
Absolutely.
step back and assess how crazy and wild those books are. You're going to find that a lot of what is spelled out in those books, it's here today. And if it's not
If
here, it's being planned.
if it's not here today, it's waiting in the wings.
Exactly.
It's the technology, nanotechnology, and neuroscience, and bioscience, and information communication technologies are set to merge together
Hmm.
and to merge with biodiversity. This is open source material. This is you can go to the EU Commission and look up various different projects on Horizon 2020 and put in that statement for a search, and you will find information about it. You'll even find transhumanism on there. And interestingly, when I went to the AAAS conference in San Jose, one of the key funders, sponsors, and people with the stands in the exhibition hall was Horizon 2020 and the Human Brain Project. And jokingly, I went to the Human Brain Project stand, and there are some people on there. I was looking through; they had lots of leaflets and DVDs and different things like that. And of course, they were expecting just the scientists to be there. And I said to them, "Oh, I said, have you got any information on transhumanism?" And the guy looked at me and he laughed. He said, "Oh, no, we don't have anything like that." And I turned back at him and I said, "That's a trick question I just asked you, isn't it? Because everything about the Human Brain Project is about transhumanism. It's
Yeah.
if it's applied in a certain way, and
Hmm.
many of the people in these areas, they don't actually know what's going on. But interestingly, with the Human Brain Project, many neuroscientists have walked out on the projects. They're not happy. There's a large percentage of them that are going, well, this is going too far. So it's interesting that perhaps, the control of the oligarchy and the elites is not absolute, and that many of the scientists, I talked to a scientist about geoengineering at one of these after conference eat and greet type situations, which is a great way to network with these different scientists. And I happened to be talking to him and saying about, he's asking me questions, why am I here? And I was saying, I'm a researcher and an activist about geoengineering. First question was, are you one of the good guys or one of the bad guys? Which I thought was interesting.
That's what he asked you?
Yeah, that was before you answered. First thought, you one of the good guys or one of the bad guys? But the way he said it was kind of like he was being serious, not like joking.
Yeah. My response would have been, well, what's a good guy? What's a bad guy?
Well, that's it. That's what I actually said. Well, I said, I like to think I'm one of the good guys.
Yeah.
But basically, I went on to tell him, saying that I'm doing, all this activism about geoengineering, and I'm unhappy about the idea that they'll be spraying aluminium nanoparticles into our atmosphere. And he was like, what? That's what they want to do? I said, yeah. And it's, I've got research papers to prove that it's in jet fuel, or at least Wrights-Patterson Air Force Research Laboratory have done research about the effects of aluminium nanoparticles because they say it's in jet fuel. And I said it's also in biodiesel. It's used in biodiesel. And he looked at me and he said, oh my God, he said, you're going to end up with an awful lot of dumb people. And because basically all neurological damage, Alzheimer's is linked to that.
Yeah.
Many other neurological disorders. And he looked absolutely horrified. But he said to me, interestingly, that ties in with one of the seminars that he'd just been to see. And it was about designer proteins that could be used to mop up aluminium from the brain. Aluminium nanoparticles. So they have their solutions. So early on, you were saying about, how these scientists like Ken Caldera and David Keefe are, how they're involved and they know what's going to be happening and don't they think about the consequences? Well, I think there are solutions for them. So maybe they'll have access to these designer proteins so they can get rid of the excess aluminium nanoparticles in their brains.
Yeah, they
so
have the anecdote, yeah.
These issues. It's I kind of get the feeling that there is still only a core group who are fully on board, and a large part of the group are not aware of the bigger picture, but they're under pressure because of their careers or, making a name for themselves or for whatever motive they have, or simply they wouldn't get on board with a conspiracy theory because, it's too out there. But they're intelligent enough to realize if we can present enough information and the number of people who are questioning this is growing and growing, and they're becoming better educated, and the information they're sharing is becoming more palatable, I think that we can reach those who are not fully on board.
So it's interesting, Max. So, this is really very interesting to listen to because it sounds obvious that you have established a very strong network of contacts within the geoengineering business. And so what is your assessment of, you were at San Jose and Cambridge, right?
Yeah.
So what is your assessment of how that went from your perspective, from an activist perspective? Do you believe that that you made some headway?
Well, I know that as each opportunity that I've had to speak with the key players, there's no doubt whatsoever. They take us very, very seriously, and they've changed their tactics and they alter their strategies. So therefore, that would say to me that you know, they have at least enough respect for us to try and change their game plan because they're worried about being caught out.
Yeah.
Incidentally, Jim Hayward from the Met Office actually refused Terry Lawton to video him, and he said, "Oh no, I can't let you video me in case you catch me out." But, you know, which is kind of like one of those off-the-cuff sort of comments that makes you realise these people are aware that we are catching up, and we are starting to rely on verifiable information. And the thing is, they might try ad hominem attacks and try to you know, say we're conspiracy theorists, we're chemtrailers or whatever. But the fact is, we are trying to use facts, and we're not giving up. And I research every single day, and I know many other people do as well, and we find new information all the time.
Right.
Even when I was at Cambridge, there was a guy called Dr. Stephen Salter and many others I was talking to. But I was telling him about a 1970s paper about using contrails for weather modification. And when I was discussing this with him, he's like, can I have a look at that, please? Can I just write down the title of that? And that was like, it's great. I'm bringing information to these people that they're unaware of, but they're supposed to be experts in their field, the world-leading experts. You know, so we can reach these people, and I kind of feel like we just keep on keeping on and rely on information that supports us, because the information is out there. You might have to dig for it.
Right.
They're looking for it, but it's there. And I mean, interestingly, actually, that guy I was just referring to, I talked to him. I was he was a guy talking about cloud whitening. That's his field, particular field. And I said to him that ship tracks are quite a big deal as far as creating cloud cover, or cloud cover being created. And I said to him, interestingly, I was looking at old satellite images from the Tiras weather satellite that went up in 1960. And basically, the early years, there were no ship tracks. In fact, there was a lot less cloud even. And I talked to a different scientist the night before, and she said, oh yeah, ship tracks, we've noted them since 1967 from early satellite images. And I said, well, I've been looking at satellite images from the 1960s when the first satellite images started coming back. So it's a 7-year period with no ship tracks.
Max, could you explain these tracks?
Okay, ship tracks are kind of similar to contrails in a sense, but they're much, much bigger. Basically, all the ships that are, well, not all of the ships, some of the ships that are sailing across the equator and different parts of the world, their exhaust from their engines the particles are going high up into the atmosphere and creating clouds.
Okay,
and these clouds sometimes are so huge when you see them on the satellite images, they're like contrails times 20. They're huge. So when you've got a lot of those, you've suddenly got a massive cloud bank created out in the ocean. And of course, if that's done over the equator where it's much warmer, the way the atmospheric system works is all those particles will be lifted up much higher, and they'll eventually go right over to the Arctic or to the Antarctic, because that's the way the atmosphere works. Now, I talked to this particular, the scientist I was talking to about the contrails used for weather modification. And I said to him about the ship tracks and how there's this 7-year period where we were able to monitor with satellites, and there weren't any ship tracks until 1967. And he said, that's interesting, because in 1967 in the US, there was the US Clean Air Act. And the US Clean Air Act was introduced in 1967, but it's been in incremental stages and in different ways. But at that time, that signalled, because I asked him, I said, well, with road fuels, there's sulfur in road fuels. What happened with the US Clean Air Act? And he said, he said, because I asked him, could it be removed? He said, yes, it can be removed. In fact, it was added to get better combustion. So did they remove it? He said, yes, they did. They had to reduce it because of the US Clean Air Act and all the smog and the pollution. So I said, what happened to it? He said, well, they don't have the same restrictions for ships.
Oh,
So
okay.
the sulfur was added to the marine diesel. So basically, from 1967 onwards, they've been deliberately adding sulfur to marine diesel so they can create the ship tracks, because the geoengineering program has been going on for many, many decades.
Very
That
interesting.
was an interesting confirmation for me about that
Yeah.
part of the ship track part, because it wasn't there before. And the satellite imagery in that little time scale is enough to confirm it.
Now, Max, the next conference is in Paris in July.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I will actually be presenting there,
Excellent.
which is really good. I've and let me just I'll read out the abstract for my presentation. My abstract is exploring the concerns of emerging climate skeptic groups within civil society. A growing proportion of society are using the information age to research the past, observe the present, and are subsequently becoming organised to protect the future, reflecting a perception of man's influence on climate change, whether intentional or unintentional. I'll be basically looking to the past for cues to changes in our climate,
Okay.
and the reaction of people currently observing. So I'm basically looking at the history of weather and climate modification, and I'm looking at the current observations that people are forming chemtrail movements and various environmental groups, because we're concerned what's going on, and where it's going, i.e. the geopolitical strategies of the New World Order. So I should be trying to link those three specific areas: the past, the present, and the near future, to expose some of the facts that I've been able to find.
Yeah. And now, Max, how do you go about getting on the agenda on one of these conferences? Do you have to apply? How does that work?
Yes, you have to apply.
Okay.
I mean, we were lucky enough. Once you kind of start attending these conferences, you do get emails and notification of different conferences. But also, I mean, once I realised in the last year at Berlin how important it was to attend these conferences, I just started to have a look to see what conferences were available. And I know the Paramount conference would be the December Paris conference, but at that point it'll already be a done deal. We're talking about the United Nations Climate Treaty, and this will sort of try to confirm all the propaganda and say that we have to take climate action, we have to change the way society lives. They want to alter human behaviour, and basically I realise we need to look at the conferences in the build-up to this treaty, because if we attended the treaty one, it would be a bit late. It's a bit like chasing after the horse when it's already gone. So by attending these conferences in the build-up, I can only hope that we can reach enough people. We can raise important facts and issues, and we can turn the tide.
Okay. So my question would be, Max, I'm just trying to understand this a little bit. So San Jose, Cambridge, Paris, France in July. This is all table setting then for December?
Yes, this is all the build-up. Basically, like the Cambridge one and Berlin in particular was about, in my opinion, was about the core steering group confirming the latest updated information and developing a consensus of opinion
Okay.
amongst the professionals. Similarly in San Jose as well, really. And basically, I kind of look at those conferences as I met people there who I felt were kind of genuine people, and I had a lot of respect for them, and they were very kind and courteous, and so I came away with a feeling, having pushing the conversation with them, that a lot of the people, they weren't on board. I mean, there's a big difference between me having a conversation with Alan Robock or Tom Ackerman or something else. I know that these people are aware, very aware. I mean, I probably know who all the core people are, and they're certainly aware. But there are many people who are, career scientists or, people who might not be initiated to that level, and I don't think they could all be, because it would be too much of a fragile situation to have too many people aware of the biggest situation to control. So, they have their core group that control it. So I kind of live in hope that we can reach those people who are not part of that committee, or even, hey, who knows, you never know, maybe we can reach the ones in the committee. I doubt it, the steering group. But I think just by nudging them all the time and letting them know that actually the people are waking up, because a lot of people supported me to go to California. I could not have gone unless it wasn't for the generous donations that many people gave to me. So that's an indication that people are behind us.
Right, right.
And I think that's a strong message to the people in the authorities, that we don't buy their lies and propaganda, and we are researching information to support that skepticism of their propaganda. We are beginning to realise, hang on, there really is a conspiracy. We understand what the motives are, what their end goals are. This isn't like an open-ended thing, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. No, we know what they want. We can see the methods they're using to try and achieve those goals. And I think that puts, I kind of think of knowledge is power. And there's a reason that saying is so important. It's because the more people that know what's going on, then their deceptions won't work anymore.
Right.
And they do listen to us. So, I think it's really, really important that we go to these places, to these conferences, and, meet these people in a diplomatic fashion, in a calm and collected way. But, we're just not taking it anymore. And the way that we go about that is by doing the research to support our claims and to present our case and to expose the truth.
Now, Max, was there a core group of activists that were with you at these conferences?
Yes, there were a few people there. Yes. Yeah. And, it's always great to have support. In California, there was Patrick Roddy, Val Hal, and quite a few other people. I can't remember all their names. So wonderful people. I had such a good reception, and there was a hell of a lot of camaraderie. It was a really good movement there. And in the UK, you've got Harry Rhodes and Olga Raffa and Cassandra Scott and Mona Norman, and in Ireland you've got Terry Lawton, and there are many, many more. I can't really name all their names, but wonderful people who are proactive, who share their information, who are basically getting people motivated to go on demonstrations or to do other proactive activities to wake people up.
It's excellent. It's, I tip my hat to you and the activists that are heads down doing all this research, going to these conferences, making the presentations. I know, Max, that this is a lot of hard work. I know it is.
Well, I tell you what, I must admit there are many times I feel exhausted. I spend pretty much every available bit of energy I've got, and I'm pretty certain that I could other people who are doing the same thing would say the same. That basically, I think that once you're awake, you can't go back to sheep.
Right.
And the more you find out, the more important it becomes. I mean, it is pretty hard going sometimes, make no bones about it. I don't work as much as I used to work, although I am working. And, we've got lives. I've got stuff to do. But my life really is on hold. All my plans and my projects that I have are, I've got a second property with a roof falling in and a wall bulging, ready to fall out, and it's like, I need to do that. But I'm not doing that at the moment because this is the most important thing. And not just from a personal perspective, just because I understand it is. In the sense that we are very, very close. If we can make a difference, then, it's between now and that conference. What we really need is as many people as possible joining us, supporting us, using verifiable information. That's the most important thing. There's enough information out there that can create a very, very strong foundation to share information about. It's very, very important And I think just generally, like earlier on, just looking up at the sky sometimes, going in the town centre with your camera and just looking at the chemtrails, and you'll find that people will come up to you and say, what are you taking pictures of?
Yeah, I've done that. Yep.
Everything helps. And you know what? It doesn't, it's not just on the key activists' shoulders. Everybody has a responsibility to make a difference, and that difference just might be getting one person just to go, you know what, I was watching those planes and yeah, I can't believe it. I never noticed how many trails they leave. Whatever it is, if you could just sow the seed with one person, that helps.
Exactly.
It all helps.
That's right. Now, Max, what's the best way for those in the audience to support your efforts?
Well, I'm going to do another GoFundMe donation request, because I need some money to go to the Paris conference. So I mean, that'd be really great if people could help. I hate asking for money, but it really makes all the difference, because we kind of just haven't got enough money really. But so it's not necessary. But I mean,
hey, you got to do what you got to do. San Jose was very successful, right? That GoFundMe program.
That was amazing.
Yeah.
People raised all the money. I had to kind of wait. The airfare went up because I had to wait to see if there would be enough money raised, because that's the first time. But it was fantastic. Yeah, they raised nearly 3,000 euros. So I was amazed, and it really was a great confirmation that people care enough that they'll support us. That was that's a heartwarming experience. Actually, it's like people really, really do care, and it's not just a cyber world experience. This is all real. So that was very, very good, and very welcome. And they could not have gone if it wasn't for that help.
Right. Well, if that's what we need to do to get you there and the other activists there, then that's what we need to do.
Yeah. Well, I know that. Alexander May Hunter, she's just done a GoFundMe, and it's so good. She's also presenting in Paris, and she's going to be tackling the legal side of things. So, I mean, all help to everyone. I mean, the thing is, most people who are doing activism and research, they kind of, even if they had money, they kind of drain their resources, because you spend all your time. Right. And I mean, I've turned up for jobs before where people have recommended me, and they've seen me in my van, and they've just literally said, look, I'm really, really sorry, but this isn't going to work out. No work for you. And, I have to deal with that sometimes. And, it's pretty tough going. But, we just soldier on. And because I know that we're close. We're close. I really know we're at that precipice where either all our efforts will pay off and things will change, or they are changing, but they will change sufficiently. And there's so many different issues coming to the forefront now. It could be a number of issues that exposes and hopefully decapitates the new world order, because that's what it's going to need. The head of the snake needs to come off. We need to get rid of these people that are doing this, but we're close to that. Or I mean, I don't know how long I can keep doing this, because it's kind of like, if they start getting their treaties in place, then that's very difficult to change.
Yeah, that becomes a lot more difficult.
Yeah, so we have to stop it. So that, I mean, it is, and I know we can stop it. And it was interesting, they were still reeling at the Cambridge conference about the Berlin Declaration failure. So that was very interesting. It just proves it was really only a handful of people at the Berlin Declaration who were contesting the consensus, who were challenging the establishment, and doing it with enough information, reliable information, verifiable information, that it did sway a lot of the people there.
Yeah.
So it proves that we can be effective. And I just kind of feel, okay, let's try this in Paris. This is going to be at the UNESCO building. There's going to be people there from the United Nations. This is moving up a gear.
Yep.
This is confronting the, the next layer of minions.
Right. It's moving closer and closer to the big show, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Max, when you do your GoFundMe, let me know, and I'll make sure I get it out there. I'll get it on the blog like I did last time, and
Yeah,
we'll
that was
try to
great.
get it as distributed and as far-reaching as we possibly can.
Yeah, I will do it soon because although I'm presenting, I still have to pay to go in, and it's not cheap. It's like €600. So I'll be starting that very soon because the early bird thing is nearly over.
Yeah. All right. And so, Max, I've taken up so much of your time, but this has been just a great conversation as it was the last time we spoke. And it's great to catch up with you because you are there front and center in this battle. And we're able to hear what goes on inside these walls when they have these conferences. And I think that's very important for those of us that care about this and those in the audience that are following this to hear.
Well, thank you for you. I really think that your last radio show we did together was a really, really good show. I think that helped a lot, and I'm now realizing how great it is to have support. It really helps a great deal.
Oh, yeah.
So I'd like to thank everybody. I thank you as well. It makes a big, big difference.
Yeah, a little help goes a long way, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It makes all the difference, really. Sometimes in the past, you felt like a voice in the wilderness, but
Yeah,
now it feels like there's hundreds of hands holding me up,
yeah,
and others. It's not just me. There's so many people now who are stepping up to the plate, and that's a great change.
yeah, it's super. It really is. Well, Max, I want to thank you. And as you know, you have an open invitation to come on anytime. So anytime you have an update, you want to chat, whatever it may be, if you want to come back after the July conference in Paris, we can connect. And certainly the December conference. We should talk about that when that rolls around.
Yeah, we'll have to see what our strategy will be following the July
Yeah,
Paris conference to see, for them, they kind of feel like they will have sewn up their whole situation, and December will be a breeze for them, and everyone will just sign, and that'll be it. We just have to hope that that won't be the case.
okay. Yeah, yeah, let's hope. All
Yeah,
right.
we'll try to make it that case. Try to make it that way.
All right, my friend. I want to thank you again. I'll let you go back to your day there. I know you have a lot of stuff to get done.
Thank you.
Okay, see you soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. And that concludes my interview with Max Bliss, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. Max's website is The Real Institute, and he's also on Facebook and YouTube. Please see the show notes below for the URLs. Max's GoFundMe site for the upcoming Paris conference can be found at www.gofundme.com/TFRBKC. That link is also in the show notes below. And as always, I'd like to thank everyone for listening and visiting the blog, Sage of Quay Radio, which can be found by heading over to sageofquayradio.blogspot.com or by visiting our hub website at www.sageofquay.com. Also, if you get a moment, please take a listen to my album, Leaving Dystopia, by heading over to laboroflovemusic.com. And remember, live in truth and always serve creation. It's really that simple. See everyone next week. Be safe, enjoy, and God bless.